I'm Victoria, a senior manager at Delphi Tech, one of the biggest software companies in the state. Making my way up the ladder wasn't easy, but my financial stability was something I was proud of. Then came Jake, my charming knight in modest armor, a regular guy working a 9-to-5 job at a small local firm. He had a quiet charm and almost boyish innocence that I found captivating. It was a sunny afternoon when Jake proposed to me. He was nervous, his hands trembling as he held out the modest diamond ring. "Victoria, will you marry me?" he stammered. Of course, I had said, tears in my eyes thinking my life was falling perfectly into place. Our wedding was at St. Martha's Church, a quaint little place known more for its community than its architecture. My parents had married in the same church, so it held sentimental value for me. I walked down the aisle, my heart pounding, and took my place beside Jake. When our eyes met, I noticed something off. His eyes lacked the sparkle I'd seen during our dating years, and his smile seemed forced. The officiant began speaking, and I listened with half an ear, my attention on Jake. "Jake, you may now kiss the bride," said the officiant. Jake leaned in. His lips met mine, but the kiss felt cold, mechanical. We turned to face our friends and family, their applause filling the room, but the happiness I should have felt was marred by the puzzlement over Jake's demeanor. "Is everything okay?" I whispered as we exited the church, a throng of well-wishers throwing rose petals over us. "Yeah, just a bit overwhelmed," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "Big crowd, you know?" We headed to our wedding reception, which was a lavish affair. My parents insisted on going all out, but even in that setting of extravagance, Jake seemed distant. During our first dance, he was physically present, but mentally miles away. "I thought this was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives," I said softly, trying to get through to him as we swayed to unchained melody. It is. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I've just got a lot on my mind," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine for just a fleeting second before looking away again. The rest of the night went by in a blur. I smiled, I laughed, and I played the part of a happy bride. But inside, I felt a churning unease. Was it cold feet, or was it a premonition of what our life together would be? I couldn't put my finger on it. Jake hardly spoke to me during our drive to the hotel for our honeymoon night. Once we were in the room, he claimed fatigue and went straight to sleep while I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling and wondering what I had gotten myself into. Had I just married a man who was as much of a stranger to me as he was to himself? Despite the weirdness, I believed things would settle down. A marriage has its ups and downs, I reasoned. Jake would open up eventually, and we'd build our happily ever after. Little did I know that I was setting the first brick of a house that would never become a home. It was a beginning, yes, but of a dream or a nightmare, only time would tell. And time, as it turned out, had quite the twisted tale to unfold. The first few months of our marriage were, at the surface, idyllic. We had bought a house together, a charming 2-story building with a red door and white picket fence, the quintessential American dream. Inside, it was spacious yet cozy, with large windows that let in a lot of light. It felt like a home, or at least it had the potential to be one. When we were house hunting, I remember Jake showing a particular interest in this one. His eyes had sparkled as he toured the rooms, already envisioning a future there. "Imagine our kids playing in that yard, Victoria," he had said, his arm around my shoulder as we stood on the porch. "And dinner parties in this dining room, surrounded by friends and family," I added, feeling optimistic. "Yeah, it's perfect," he agreed, and for a moment he was the man I thought I had married, full of dreams and love. The mortgage, however, was a different story. The total came up to $240,000. I was fully capable of covering the mortgage payments on my salary, but Jake insisted that we contribute equally. "We're in this together, Victoria. I don't want you to bear all the financial burdens," he said earnestly. "In that case, we'll share the payments," I agreed, thinking this was a sign of his commitment to our life together. Months rolled by, and I diligently took care of the mortgage payments, assuming that Jake was doing the same from his end. One evening, as I was going through our financial statements, I noticed that only my contributions were recorded. "Jake, have you been making your mortgage payments? They're not showing up in our statements," I confronted him one evening when he came home from work. "Ah, yeah, about that," he stammered. avoiding my eyes. Work's been slow, and they've cut back on some of our hours. I'll make it up as soon as I can. I promise. I felt a mixture of pity and frustration. All right, but we have to be transparent about these things. I don't mind covering for you, but you have to let me know what's going on. Sure, I will, he mumbled, but something in the way he said it made me skeptical. And so it went. I kept making the mortgage payments alone. Not once did Jake contribute. His excuse was always the same. Times were hard. Work was scarce, except he always had enough money for drinks. He started coming home late, reeking of alcohol, slurring his words, and falling into bed without even a goodnight kiss. The house that was supposed to be our haven turned into a place of solitude for me. Rooms that we had chosen together, envisioning a life filled with laughter and love, became haunting spaces of emptiness. It was like living with a ghost, sometimes there, but never really present. As the months turned into years, my patience wore thin. The house was no longer a symbol of our love or commitment, but a mocking testament to a marriage that was crumbling. And I found myself thinking, what happened to the man I married? Where did we go wrong? Yet, I continued to pay for the house, holding on to a shred of hope that things would get better. Little did I know, the real breaking point was just around the corner, one that would shatter not just my illusions, but the very foundation upon which my life was built. That house became the stage for the ultimate betrayal, the cruel twist in a story that I had once believed would be my happily ever after. The day finally came when the last payment on the mortgage was due. A sense of achievement washed over me as I clicked the submit payment button on the bank's website. The house was officially ours, or rather, mine since I had single-handedly paid off the mortgage. I felt a mix of triumph and sadness. Triumph because it was a major life milestone, and sadness because the partner I'd hoped to share this accomplishment with had become a shadow of the man I thought I married. Eager to share this important moment, I prepared a small celebration dinner. I cooked Jake's favorite, steak with a side of garlic mashed potatoes and steamed asparagus. I even opened a bottle of the fine wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. I waited and waited. 9 o'clock turned into 10, and then 11. My calls to Jake went unanswered. The steak turned cold, and the mashed potatoes lost their fluffiness. Finally, around midnight, I heard the front door creak open, but something was off. I could hear giggles, the clinking of keys, and stumbling footsteps. "Jake, is that you?" I called out, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. "Victoria, my darling, we're home." Jake's voice boomed through the house, reeking of irony and alcohol. I walked into the living room and froze. There he was, visibly drunk, grinning like a fool. And he wasn't alone. A young woman clung to his arm, giggling like she was in on some cruel joke. "Who the hell is this, Jake? And what is she doing in our house?" My voice was trembling with rage and disbelief. "Oh, meet Lisa. We've been hanging out. We're celebrating," he grinned, his voice full of mockery. "Celebrating? Celebrating what?" "The end of our marriage," I snapped. Jake's face contorted. "Why do you always have to be such a buzzkill? We're having fun. Is that a crime?" "Yes, Jake. When you bring a stranger into our home, it's a damn crime against our marriage." "Your home? Don't you mean my home?" He lunged toward me, his eyes wild with a mix of drunkenness and something darker. "Yes, I paid off the house today. Every single dollar. I was waiting to celebrate with you, my husband. And you come home like this." My voice broke, my eyes blurring with tears. "Well, maybe if you weren't so obsessed with the house and money, we'd have had something real," he snarled, his voice laced with a bitterness I'd never heard before. "This is real, Jake. Our marriage is supposed to be real. I've been fighting for us. And what have you been doing?" He smirked, his eyes meeting mine in a way that sent chills down my spine. "Maybe I've been fighting for a life outside of your perfect little prison here." That was it. The breaking point. I looked into the eyes of the man I'd pledged my life to and saw a stranger. My heart broke, not just for the loss of our love, but for the utter waste of the years we'd spent together, the emotional investment, the dreams that were built and shattered. "Get out! Both of you! Get the hell out of my house!" I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. His eyes narrowed and he took a menacing step closer. "You get out! This is my house now." With those words, he pushed me aside like I was nothing, a piece of trash to be disposed of. As I stumbled back, catching myself on the wall, the gravity of his betrayal hit me. It wasn't just about the house, or the money, or even the young woman giggling by the door. It was the calculated devaluation of our relationship, the emotional degradation, and the final violent assertion of his betrayal. In that moment, as they laughed and stumbled upstairs, I knew my life was about to change irrevocably. My marriage was over, but as I stood there in the hollow silence of the house I'd just paid off, I made a vow to myself. I would reclaim my life, no matter the cost. Jake had just instigated a war, and I was going to fight back. I spent the first night after Jake's appalling betrayal at my best friend Sarah's apartment. As I lay on her guest bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind raced through a myriad of emotions: anger, sadness, humiliation. When sleep finally claimed me, it was a restless slumber filled with haunting dreams of broken vows and shattered illusions. Sarah and I sat down for coffee the next morning, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken thoughts. I knew Sarah had seen this coming. She had often cautioned me about Jake's increasingly odd behavior. "Victoria, I can't say I'm surprised, but I am so sorry," she began, her eyes meeting mine with sincere concern. "Yeah, I guess we all saw it coming." "I just didn't want to believe it," I admitted, my voice tinged with a vulnerability I seldom allowed myself to show. "It's not your fault, you know. Love can blind us, make us ignore the red flags," she consoled me. "It didn't just blind me, Sarah. It made me deaf and dumb, too. I was so focused on creating the perfect life, the perfect home, that I overlooked the fact that the man I was sharing it with was far from perfect." Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're only human, Vic. We all make mistakes in love. What matters is what you do next." "What I do next?" I echoed, pondering her words. My thoughts raced back to the house I'd just paid off, to the years of my life invested in a man who had turned out to be a monumental fraud. My mind was suddenly clear. It was as if a fog had lifted. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine and making Jake face the consequences of his actions. "You're right, Sarah. It's time for some real change. I've been a spectator in my own life for far too long. Now it's time to take charge," I said, a newfound determination rising within me. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Sarah asked, her eyes widening. "Oh, I am definitely thinking it," I confirmed. "I'm going to file for divorce, and I'm not just going to leave it at that. I'm going to make sure he regrets every moment he thought he could take advantage of me." Sarah grinned, her face reflecting the fierce resolve in my own heart. "That's the spirit. So, what's the plan? First, I need to consult a lawyer. I've been paying off that house alone. I'll be damned if he thinks he can just push me out and claim it as his own. And what about Lisa, the homewrecker? She's just a pawn in his twisted game. Right now, my focus is on Jake. He's the one who took vows with me. He's the one who broke them. Then let's not waste any more time. My cousin is a family lawyer, one of the best. Want me to set up a meeting?" Sarah offered. "That would be perfect," I nodded, my resolve hardening with each passing moment. That afternoon, as I sat in the lawyer's office, listening to him lay out my options, I felt an unfamiliar sense of empowerment. I was finally waking up from the self-imposed slumber that had kept me captive for years. Gone was the naive girl who believed in fairy tale endings. In her place was a woman scorned, a woman awakened, and as the saying goes, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. But first, there was a wrong that needed to be righted, a debt that needed to be settled. Jake had no idea what was coming, but he was about to find out, and I relished the thought of the shock that would soon replace his arrogant smirk when he realized I was no longer the pushover he thought I was. This was my awakening, and I was ready to reclaim not just my home, but my life, my dignity, and my self-worth. Jake's reign of emotional terror was about to come to a screeching halt, and I was the one who would slam on the brakes. My resolve crystallized with each day that passed. I met with my lawyer, Gary, several times to gather all the necessary evidence for the divorce proceedings. Thankfully, the paper trail of mortgage payments was straightforward. It clearly showed I had been the sole contributor. "One more thing," Gary said at our final preparatory meeting. "Do you have any evidence of his infidelity? Photos, messages, anything?" Smiling, I handed over copies of the security camera footage showing Jake bringing Lisa into our house. "I hope this helps," Gary grinned. "Oh, it will. You're all set, Victoria. Let's hit him where it hurts." 2 weeks later, the court date arrived. Jake had been served but refused to take the summons seriously. He strolled into court, disheveled and smirking, with no lawyer in tow. In contrast, I was prepared, focused and flanked by Gary, who had a shark-like gleam in his eyes. What's this about, Victoria? "You're wasting everyone's time," Jake whispered as we waited for the judge. "You'll see," I responded, keeping my expression neutral. When the proceedings started, Gary methodically laid out our case: the mortgage payments, my stable income versus Jake's sporadic earnings, and finally, the damning video footage of Jake's infidelity. As Gary spoke, I glanced at Jake. His smirk had evaporated, replaced by a look of dawning realization. "Do you have a lawyer to represent you, Mr. Thompson?" the judge finally asked. No, Your Honor," Jake stammered. "I didn't think I'd need one." The judge sighed, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "Very well. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Jake hesitated, then spoke. "Look, this is all just a misunderstanding. She's overreacting. We can talk it out, can't we, Victoria?" I felt my lip curl in disdain. "Talk it out? Like the many times I tried to talk to you about our problems. You chose your path, Jake." The judge didn't waste any more time. He reviewed the evidence and granted the divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences and adultery. The house was awarded to me, given I had solely paid for it, and Jake was ordered to move out within 30 days. As we left the courthouse, Jake looked shattered. "You didn't have to do this, Victoria. You ruined me." "No, Jake, you ruined yourself. I just illuminated your path of destruction for all to see." Over the next month, I watched as Jake's life unraveled. He moved out of the house, his belongings thrown haphazardly into cardboard boxes. Even Lisa, the so-called home wrecker, distanced herself when she realized he had no means to support her lavish taste, and no means to support her lavish taste. "Goodbye, Jake," I said as he took his last box from the house. "I hope the choices you've made were worth it." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. For a brief moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I'd once loved. "You didn't have to go this far, Victoria." "No, Jake, you pushed me this far, remember? That." He sighed and closed the door behind him, leaving the house empty but my spirit full. Revenge was often depicted as a damaging force, but in my case, it was a form of liberation. It was the breaking of chains, the reclaiming of my self-worth. I had fought for myself and won. The next day, I welcomed a locksmith into my home, relishing the clicks and turns of the locks being changed. It was more than a physical alteration. It symbolized my life now, secure, changed, and entirely mine. In this newly acquired solitude, I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle had been taxing, but the victory was sweet. Looking ahead, I didn't see a lonely path. Instead, I saw a road filled with endless possibilities. Jake had underestimated me, believing he could break me. Instead, his betrayal became the crucible in which a stronger, fiercer Victoria was forged. As I sipped a cup of coffee in my reclaimed sanctuary, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "So, how does it feel to be a warrior queen?" I chuckled and typed back. "It feels like coming home, but this time to a kingdom that's entirely mine." In seeking revenge, I found something far more valuable: myself, and that, I realized, was the most potent vengeance of all.